I was trying to fix. But there wasn't, that was this human being, and seeing in their eyes that I could trust them and feel that sort of safety to be able to start that trauma recovery journey, made me want to dive into this work, made me want to go up the ladder as a part of the association. And as Esther mentioned, now I train as a part of the association to help make, part of the goal and the dream of the association is to make as many trauma recovery coaches as we can, so that the world can have access to trauma recovery coaches to heal at a different model than clinical settings and therapy. And I'm just so thankful to be a part of it. Grateful to be here with everyone who's a part of that association today. Thank you, Esther, for putting this on. Thank you, Michael and Sam, for wanting to be a part of this. I'm so grateful to be here. This is Will. I'm done speaking.
Thank you, Will. Michael, would you go next? Because I really like that you combine meditation, Tai Chi, and Qigong. So all this body work and feeling your body and relaxation with coaching. I think that's a very important combination. Maybe you can say a bit about that and about your own journey.
I'd be happy to. Thank you very much for the honor. I appreciate the opportunity. And I just can't express how thankful I am to be in a panel and also in a community with so many of my fellow IAO TRC coaches. We've become sort of a real fellowship. And I think, Will was alluding to that idea that when we've gone through different traumas and difficulties, sometimes it's hard to find an understanding with others until you encounter others who've had similar traumas, and you start to share some of those stories together, and you recognize the fact that we're not alone, and that we can really encourage one another to travel along the journey. And so this is one of the great blessings that I've experienced as a member of the association and from the training. I came to, probably like many people who get involved in trauma work, be they psychologists or therapists or therapy coaches like ourselves, usually there's a reason. There's some sort of a personal attachment. Either something's happened to ourselves or something's happened to others with whom we are close. And for my part, went through probably just as many traumas as anybody else has gone through in their life. Abandoned by my father at an early age, raised by an alcoholic single mom, and it had a whole host of different dysfunctional family issues that later played themselves out in adult life. And I had no idea what the root cause of so many of those challenges and issues were. And I didn't realize until really going through some of the training with the IAO TRC and doing some of my own independent reading and really kind of reconnecting with my source and looking back at my life and looking back at my childhood and recognizing, wow, some of my adult level defense mechanisms and problem solving strategies really have their origins in the way my experience as a child, the way I was raised within my family, the dysfunction that was there. But it took me decades of growth and direction and misdirection to really kind of figure that out. And then, compare my story with like-minded people and realize, oh, wow, I'm not alone. There are several other people that have that type of an idea. And I know for me personally, sometimes looking at therapy through the lens of vulnerability as a male, and that's sort of the theme of our discussion here, I'm curious to know, does anyone else have a visceral reaction, specifically the males? Do you kind of have a visceral reaction to the idea of being male and being vulnerable? I know I do. I know we get programmed in society to think that vulnerability equals weakness, instead of vulnerability equaling emotional authenticity and availability, getting in touch with our true feelings, desires, opening ourselves on up to the potential pain and disappointment that can come with failures. And, these are all parts of the human condition, but sometimes there's an expectation for men in particular to be something different than that. And it does a great disservice to us. And I think hopefully during the course of our conversation, we'll explore that a little bit more. For me personally, blending coaching with the modalities. I see I'm freezing here. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Or can you hear me rather?
Yeah, you're good.
My screen's frozen. But blending those modalities of Tai Chi and Qigong to really, and meditation. I'm a trained Namashivaya meditation trainer, to incorporate the ideas of introspection, focus on self, physically, mentally, spiritually, really blends on into becoming emotionally authentic. And so for the folks that I want to work with, and specifically men who need to sort of get in touch with their more divine selves and their more raw natural selves, I think that coaching, trauma therapy, and combined with Eastern oriented types of ways of thinking and performing and being tend to work well together. So that's the lens through which I see my work. And that's, I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I want to give the word to you, Sam, right away, because you also have a very unique and I think already very vulnerable and authentic way to add something to coaching, and that's art. And you cannot do art when you hide. So would you like to answer Michael's question about the visceral reaction to when we speak about vulnerability?
Yeah, the thoughts that come up for me, well, first of all, hello, my name is Sam. I'm a certified trauma recovery coach. I got my certification a couple months ago, so pretty freshly certified. But through attending the program and really getting to know people and hearing people's stories, it was very visceral for me in that I did more introspection. You know, I consider myself a pretty introspective person, and I think that, you know, I'm very in touch with myself. And then going into this program and learning so much about trauma and hearing other people's stories, I realized that there was a whole well of stuff underneath the stuff that I had been thinking about. And it just, it was hard, but it was also really, I think, important to grow. And, you know, putting me on a path that I have felt that I should have been on for a very long time. And I think the visceral part of being vulnerable with what Michael said is that I think as men, we're taught so much and we internalize so much without consciously even making those decisions through our upbringing, through media depictions, everything else, that we don't even realize why these things are hard that we can't do. Mm-hmm. And I think it's funny that, you know, vulnerability, when we think about it, is such a hard thing to do for some people, men maybe more, I'm not sure, and then you champion, you know, men have to do the hard thing and we gotta, you know, tough it out and be this or that. But the hardest thing to do is be vulnerable. But that's one thing that, oh, no, we gotta be quiet. You gotta be quiet and stoic, and that's how you're supposed to be. And whether we're told that growing up or not, we witness it all the time. And I think it has a massive impact on what happens to us, you know. But once we realize that when you can be vulnerable, that makes you so much stronger and so much more powerful in yourself. And that's what I've gotten through that. And the little history I went to, I'm an artist. I've always enjoyed painting, sculpting, drawing, everything, and went to art school, got my degree. And I think marrying trauma coaching and art is just really natural for me. And it's always been a really healing thing for me. And I think that if I can give that to someone else, I think that it's a beautiful thing. So that's what I like to practice.
I agree. That's very beautiful. And I get that. Like for me, it's always been writing. So writing and coaching is one thing I realized. You can combine that too. It opens different doors. So I want to give the word to everybody who has a question, but I would like to ask one question first that popped into my head when I was listening. And after that, just leave every question in the chat or unmute and ask them. So all of you spoke about how hard it is to access vulnerability. So how do men cope with overwhelming feelings when they cannot access their vulnerability? I ask this because I read a lot about men show depression not with sadness, but with anger. So how was it for you? How did you cope?
I want to jump in and just kind of in response to all the shares that Sam and Michael and myself, and realizing not until after I shared that I had a hard time diving into talking more about myself. I wanted to hear about other people. Part of what I did as a response to not being able to be vulnerable and share as a man was just shut down and be quiet, be small. You know, when I shared to the men that were in my life when I was young, I was, you know, it was shut up, work hard, put your nose to the grindstone and do your work, be quiet, be stoic, whatever. There wasn't a voice for kids or for younger people. And so I'm drawing from the things that Michael shared and that Sam shared. And Sam's an amazing artist. And so I don't know, you know, if it's easy for you to talk about your art. I love checking out your artwork. I mean, it should be applauded, and I'm sure it's a huge part of your healing. And Michael, all the work that you've done in the somatic realms and in meditation and mindfulness. And I didn't even mention that I'm in somatic realms as well, and I do neuroaffective touch, right? I'm so easy and so quick to go to a place of just be small, let's let everybody else talk. Part of the story is that don't be vulnerable, it's not safe. There aren't places to be safe. So until I experienced that, like I shared earlier, until I experienced that in another human being, I didn't even realize it was possible. And I think of myself as having some family, at least some really close friends who I feel I can share things with, but not at the level of understanding things through a trauma lens, not to where we could share and understand each other at the level of our woundedness and just be completely safe with each other. And that's been the beauty of what I hear Michael, Sam, Esther, anyone who's come through the program that we're part of, especially understanding that safety being a huge piece of what leads us to be feeling free, to be vulnerable. And I want to allow that to happen more. So doing things like this, showing up, having talks like this is just what a great opportunity to kind of open that door and try to swing it wider. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Will. So the other Sam, Michael, how hard was it to access your vulnerability and how did you cope? I will not let that question go.
Do you mind if I go, Michael?
Please go, please.
I think I'm kind of in the same boat as Will, is when my emotions would get overwhelming and I wouldn't be able to be vulnerable, I would make myself small and shut down and dissociate, and I couldn't get everything out. And I think that sometimes it's hard, and then sometimes we don't even realize that we're doing it. I think one of the stereotypical things that men deal with is, you know, being a breadwinner or go-getter, you know, supporter of your family, everything else, and if you can't do that or you don't do that, then you're a failure and you don't deserve to have any of that, right? And I was really struggling, and my wife, who is my rock and the person I share everything with, I realized that I for a good amount of time I lost my job at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was struggling pretty bad for a while, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I wasn't able to be vulnerable with the person I'm closest with and tell her I'm not really sure what I'm going to do and I'm scared. And I got this. I know what I'm doing, no problem. Like, And I kept that going for a little while, not consciously trying to BS her, but because I thought that that's what I had to do. And it was only when I started to be completely honest and share my fears, everything else, that she told me, she's like, that's not the problem. We can fix all of that. The problem is when I don't know about this stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, luckily I have somebody who's very understanding of all that and knows how to deal with that. But I think that's one of the biggest fears, and that keeps us from being vulnerable, is we don't know people's reactions. And a lot of times in the past, we've got reactions that have been very negative for us. And that every single time, that teaches us to just be quiet. So.
Yeah, agreed completely. Michael?
I have felt often, including today, right now, you know, the idea of maybe if I be small, you know, I can, or if I had, you know, really, I'd go sometimes often in times in the other direction, rather than embrace the vulnerability. I would choose to try to armor up and defend myself by promoting myself in a number of different ways. I would, you know, did the motorcycle thing, and then I threw myself into education. I get more and more degrees and amass more and more student debt. But, you know, I felt that I was overcoming my vulnerability by constantly adding more and more accolades to, you know, to my list of accomplishments, and more letters at the end of my name and all that good stuff. And just continue. And I think it's kind of common for men in particular to throw themselves into work. We hear about that constantly. So I did a number of, you know, stints in that direction. I made the foolish mistake of running for public office and got elected, unfortunately, and then took on all the responsibilities that came concurrent with those duties. But at the same time, I thought that I was elevating myself, and in some ways that I was. But I know in a lot of ways, when I was able to examine it through the lens of trauma coaching and through the lens of introspection, you know, I realized that I was trying to overcome feelings of lack in my own life, and trying to get myself real busy with things that seemed to be accomplishments and seemed to be progressive in my life. But, you know, in so many ways, they were distracting me from being the truly authentic person that I truly wanted to be. And that was, I know, a way that I ended up trying to respond to feelings of not being good enough. Was, well, then, damn it, how can I be good enough? What can I do to make sure that I'm good enough? You know, and how can I make sure that as many people as possible know out there that I'm good enough? And, you know, the person you really need to start with is yourself. And once you realize that you're enough, no matter what it is that you're doing, no matter what it is that you have, and you start there, it makes life so much more authentic. It makes life so much more relaxed. And then you put yourself in a mental and physical and spiritual position where you end up kind of resonating more with the people who are around you, who should be around you, as opposed to the ones you thought you wanted around you. So
I want to respond to that real quick, because I think it's so important from this lens of talking about vulnerability as a strength, especially talking about men. This goes for everybody across the board: mental health, wellness, being vulnerable and healing trauma, men, women, children, doesn't matter. We could all benefit from having a conversation around it. But I think it's huge that you hit on this. The statistics are astronomical. The number of men who will I like to use the words armor up. We talk about that a lot in my somatic training, and about how the different body types you see when you work on a body, if you're working in the physical realm, and how the different appearances that people will have in their bodies as armoring up. Like, it's what, 80-90% of men who bodybuild are doing so for a lot of the reasons you just mentioned, right? Myself included. I've gone after exercise, I've gone after academics, I've gone after jobs, recognition, all the time, still struggling internally with this compass of feeling something's not quite right. Something's something's off, but how do I fix this? So throw myself at something until I'm either good enough or seen enough. I didn't touch on a lot of the early childhood traumas with myself, but didn't feel supported, seen by an alcoholic father, a lot of codependency in the family, a lot of toxicity in the family. So it's. I would love to hear, Sam, if that's an experience that you recognize as well. Is that across the board, at least for us three guys here speaking tonight?
I think that yes, of course, and I think that me just being who I am and being more sensitive and just akin to, I grew up, I have two younger sisters, and single mom, divorced pretty early, and I was raised like, my mom's a pretty strong woman, and I always struggled with the duality of the masculine parts that I liked and that appealed to me, that are stereotypically masculine stuff, sports and woodworking and whatever, working out, hanging out with the guys. Like, I love doing that stuff. But, I would go to baseball practice and have a baseball game and hang out with all my friends. And then I'd go home and sit in my room for 3 days and I'd paint and not talk to anybody. And so I always enjoyed different things and, expressive things and dancing and these things that were, I was the only one of my friends that really liked to do these things that are not necessarily super masculine things. And it messed with me, and it took me a while to realize that that's who I am, and that's totally okay. And in order to be vulnerable, I think, it comes with acceptance, and you really have to accept yourself and understand yourself. And that's a really hard thing to do as well. And it can take a really long time, but I think once you get a little piece of it, and once you get a little piece of that understanding, it can grow. And if you water it, it can flourish, and then you can really love yourself. I just think it's a tough thing with all the stuff we're taught. And then if you like different things or like doing anything different, then it's easy to, get hammered back down.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Sam, because I think, like, I grew up on farms. I worked as a farm kid. I worked in construction a lot as a carpenter for a lot of years. I did a lot of jobs that were quote unquote masculine. Now I work in the realm of mental health, which is predominantly now, it didn't used to be, but predominantly now it's more female practitioners and coaches and things. I'd like to see that shift. I'd like to see that change. I'd like to see it more acceptable. There are things, art, music, I'm drawn to with a passion, but I've always had a wall between me and it, because I've had to do what I needed to do to pay the bills. I've never had it nurtured, that part of me. So I'm so grateful that you are able to, in whatever capacity, nurture yourself, and your art is amazing. Thank you for doing what you do. And thank you, Michael, for chasing the things that you chased that not only have benefited your system and the people that you help, but the things that we all do that are considered really, for the most part, not necessarily the most masculine of professions, but here we are. We're doing it. We're all guys in every sense of the word, and even some stereotypical ways, right? But we're doing things that aren't stereotypically seen as male, and I'm really thankful for that.
Thank you very much, Will. Yeah, I'm doing so, by the way, from behind my steely clad Gryffindor, probably not the most masculine of drinking vessels, but
Ravenclaw all the way. Come on.
I really appreciate that you touched on that topic, because we discussed earlier that you touched on the stereotypes and on toxic masculinity and on what society says a man has to be, and even the environment, the family, as Sam said, the surrounding, the friends. There's a picture how a man has to be. And in my opinion, it separates men from real connection with other people. So I would like to hear, how do you think and feel about that?
Well, I think it's interesting, if I may. I think it's interesting because there are certain types of I know systems that are embraced and endorsed by society where men can gather together. But think of what those systems are. I mean, they're military service. They are sports teams. You hear constantly thrown around the idea in both realms of a band of brothers, you know, and the idea that men can come together and work together and accomplish and share. It's okay in certain realms, but
Certain
not enough.
context.
You want to take that one, Will?
No, certain context. I agree. Yeah.
No, weigh in. I mean, I always find it fascinating, that idea that, you know, well, society will talk about toxic masculinity, but yet and deride it as well. It should be, but then at the same time, almost ironically, endorse so many of the same behaviors that are associated with toxic masculinity, and say, well, we want a little bit of toxic masculinity from you guys.
Oh my gosh. Okay, you're hitting on something that I'm going to probably share. It might get me in trouble and I don't care. But one of the things that I see in a lot of realms that really that hits against that button for me is people who have a lot of success and who have a lot of clout and maybe have a huge following, who are men that even might show themselves to be vulnerable in a lot of ways, but still have elements of toxic masculinity woven into what they believe in and what they profess. So what you're talking about to me is the pre-scripted norms that are okay for men to be in, right? You can only talk to a guy if you're working alongside him, or if you're doing something, if you're playing a sport alongside him. You can talk about sports, but boy, if you could cry about your sports team losing, but cry about, you know, having a fight with your spouse or your girlfriend or whatever, and it's not acceptable, right? It's okay to go out and get blotto, drunk, drugs, whatever way that's acceptable in the norm of society as a male, but it's not okay to go be vulnerable with a brother and say, listen, man, I'm hurting right now. We need more of that, you know, and I want to see, when I hear guys say things like, you know, guys have to be warriors. We need guys to be warriors, and guys are getting weak, and we got to be, guess what? You're looking at 3 guys here who I know are warriors, and you can't tell me we're not. Come spend some time with me and walk in my shoes. You know, I see some guys talking about how there's an feminization, or whatever you would call it, of the male in our society. Whatever. I don't even want to weigh in on that so much. I just don't think that we need to keep pushing the button that guys have to can only exist as warriors, can only thrive as warriors, can only be their best selves if they embrace that. You know, we're all across the spectrum of masculine, what's the word I'm looking for? Representation, right? If you want to look at the bell curve, some of us, myself, I don't fall maybe necessarily in the middle of what you consider a normal male, but a lot of the things I enjoy, a lot of the things I do for work are going to be considered more in the feminine. There are still things that I do that can make me an outlier on the masculine. Some of the work I still enjoy to do, the carpentry, the working on cars and things like that. But the reality of it is we're more alike, men, women, all genders, than we are different in any aspect of looking at sexuality and gender. And when people say things like that, it really hits against me, you know, and thank you, Michael, for bringing that up. I want to have this, from my perspective, be a place where we can have conversations around not just male problems, but let's talk about, you know, gender. Let's talk about representation and support for each other in all those realms. I'm going to spiral off into that area, so I'm going to stop speaking. But thank you, Michael, for bringing that up.
I think that you know, one of the ways that men grow is by talking to other men and being vulnerable with other men at the risk of your own safety. And, you know, I mean safety in that, like, you're not really sure how it's going to go or how it's going to receive that, because maybe you might not get the reception you want, but I feel like if you the more that men hear it and are willing to listen, then the more they're willing to grow, the more they can grow, the potential for it. I think, that's what I mean is, me coming on here and talking and telling my story and not knowing every single person on here, and, worrying what somebody might think or might say, how it, would be perceived by someone else that I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I don't mean, just unload on somebody you think is going to not receive it and be an ass. But the problem is, I think that a lot of men don't know where to go and don't know how to listen or are in a place to listen. I think that also if men were better at, being vulnerable to each other in general, they would realize that, hey, we all have a lot of the same problems going on,
Right.
And I know that when I have, been worried to talk to some of my guy friends that I don't really go that deep with, and then I do, I get it right back, and it just makes us closer. So I think that's, communication and vulnerability for men to men, I think is invaluable.
How amazing would it be that the norm would be for me to call Michael, Sam, any guy up, Doug, who's here, anyone, and say, man, I want to talk to you. I've got a problem and it's deep, and not hear this, I don't have time for that, or get the brush off, or we've all experienced it as men. If we haven't, we're living in a fantasy land that I've never experienced, because every time I've come to an uncle, a friend, whoever that's uncomfortable, I've learned to shut down. Somebody's just uncomfortable going to that level. I would love us to get to a point where, much like calling out toxic masculinity or calling out people when men are over sexualizing females walking down the street with a stereotypical construction worker hooting at a woman walking down the street, instead of us being bystanders, being a guy that says, listen, dude, that's somebody's sister, somebody's mom, somebody's daughter, knock it off. In the same realm, how do we as guys start to show up for guys and go, listen, I'm somebody who's safe to talk to. You ever need to talk, I'm here. And I don't care how anybody else feels. How do we start to show up for each other? Because I do believe that that's that element that's got to ripple out and have that, like stone thrown in a pond ripple effect. The more guys see that it's okay, much like you see safe spaces for gender equality, or for, how can we get more egalitarian in how we share with each other, not just women being able to share with women. How can guys feel safe sharing with guys? How can we get to this space where the norm is, dude, you don't have to worry, you can tell me anything, it stays with me. We build that trust and that kind of expectation in our relationships. Because I'll be honest, even though we work in these realms, how many other guys, I could count probably 2 on my hand that are in my circle on a pretty regular basis, outside of the people who are colleagues. I have a lot of colleagues that I could reach out to, right? Because we're in the similar work. But friends that I interact with on a regular basis, that I connect with that level, very, very few, even though I'm doing this type of work, and people know this about me. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to see that shift out. I'd like to see that be a huge ripple effect.
Yeah, I think that would be really important. And I just saw that somebody asked to what you said, to a part of what you said, asked a question. Mary Simmerling, Will, what would you say to the men hooting?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Will,
and
sorry,
very much
I didn't have the full question there. I'm sorry. I love what you just said. And you did talk about what you would say. Like, you can talk to me, I'm here, but how do you start that conversation? And then what do you say to try to move the needle in their mind on this? Like, how do you create space for different conversation and different way of. Thank you, Will.
Number one, from my experience, is sometimes it's not always safe as a man to say something, right? You might be the minority. If I'm a guy and I notice that the element that I'm around is a bunch of guys who might come back at me in a construction setting, a lot of times it would keep my head down, do my work, not take part in this, because it's just not safe to say anything. There might be guys who are pretty rough and tumble, and I'm not gonna cause a stir. And that's a huge issue. That's a whole nother issue. But So if there's a place, if there's a chance at building a connection, if I've built some respect with someone, it might be just as simple as it's got to start small, especially in an environment where the element is the expectation is to act that way. Because in those realms, in construction, in farm labor, in realms that are predominantly male, you're going to get more of that than you're not. You're going to get guys who see it as the norm to talk about women a certain way, and if you go against that, you're seen as different, or you're going to be an outsider, or you're not going to be somebody who's included in the in the workspace camaraderie. So at whatever level I build safety, if I can build trust with people, if I can have integrity in my job and show up every day and connect with these people in whatever small way I can, and then start that conversation however I can. If they know that I'm somebody who has kids at home and they're talking about somebody, and I go, man, I've got kids. That could very well, my kids are about that girl's age. Really? You can go there? You know, I can have that kind of a conversation with a guy at a job site, because it's real for me. That experience is real. I have kids. I don't want to perpetuate this. I don't work in those realms anymore, partly because of those facts, because it can be so toxic. How do we begin to shift that? I think with conversations like this. I wish there was an answer for getting out into those workspaces or into those organizations and having trainings, but I think it starts with each one of us opening up and talking about this on more of a regular basis, making things like this a more regular thing.
Thank you, Will. That was beautiful. Thank you so much.
I think that men have been catcalling or hooting and yelling at women. It's almost like forever, basically, but it's also become so ingrained in us. It's like men don't even realize they're doing it sometimes, and it's just because there's zero consequences for them, right? And they might be surrounded with other men, everything else. Sometimes it's one-on-one or two guys, and there's no consequences. There's nothing. If at best, that they can hope for is the woman yells back at them or engages them somehow. And if they don't, then they keep trying until she's far enough away that she can't, hear him anymore. And then whatever, they have a laugh and go about their day. Whereas this woman is walking down the street wondering if they're following her. And, it's just maybe she's been yelled at 5 times that day, and it's just, she's numb to it. I can't speak to the woman's experience other than it must suck, I imagine. And it's normalized. What's normalized is the opposite, right? The consequence doesn't happen to the person who goes along with it. The consequence tends to happen to the guy who speaks out. Yeah. And I've done it before, where it's a funny thing. I've done it, actually did it about 2 weeks ago. I was walking down the street and there was one guy, and he was yelling at somebody in a car that was driving by. And I was just right there, and I was like, what are you doing? And it was, he was like a deer in the headlights. It was, and I was like, what are you doing? Like I knew him. I was just like, why would you do that? Like stumbling over, doesn't know how to say anything. It's like, come on, man, you think she wants that? You think she wants to hear that being yelled at all the time? I'm like, that doesn't make anybody feel good. And I just kept walking. He mumbled some stuff under his breath or whatever, because he was probably just embarrassed. And who knows? Maybe he won't do it next time. Maybe he actually thought about it for once.
Yeah.
So I think, you definitely, as men, you definitely have to pick and choose your times, because you can't, as much as you want to, maybe you can't stand up every single time, because if there's a bunch of people and add alcohol, everything else, you could end up in trouble.
Yeah.
This leads me to thinking, sorry to interrupt here, a question that I posed. My head's kind of foggy, but witnessing men who are wolf whistling other women, and you're seeing that they're victimizing women, it's creating kind of a rape culture mentality. How do you, and knowing that so many women have been victimized by men as little girls, and you're going now into a world of trauma recovery where you're going to see that even more so. How, as men, do you cope with that? Do you take that on? Is there some kind of a gender shame, or kind of a blame? Like, how do you process that, knowing that so many of your gender have actually inflicted harm to the opposite gender?
Great. That's a great question, Lisa. And I saw your question go through the chat earlier on that event. And that's the reality of it is let's be real. The majority of people who experience abuse, neglect, whether it's sexually, psychologically, whatever, is at the hands of males. It's just little boys, little girls, women, men are being, for the most part, subjected to abuse, neglect, psychological, verbal, physical by men. And that's not to say that that's across the board, it's always men, but the statistics are there that support that. And how do we fit into this space? I'd say I'm glad to be a part of the solution, not the problem. And I want to see this grow. I want to see other people like Michael and Sam and myself continue to do this work and to show up and to help that ripple out in the lake. How do you guys respond to that question? It's a great question, Lisa. Thank you.
I think one thing that, you know, when we witness it as men, like, it always makes me feel really shitty. And sometimes there's something you can do about it. And sometimes you might feel powerless too, which sucks. And I've apologized to women before for other guys. I think that's something too, is just like, hey, like, sorry, you know, it's not all of us. You don't have to go super deep into it, but like, hey, that guy's a dick or whatever it is, you know, just to let them know that you're not with them. And
Yeah.
I think that's important too.
I like what you said there, Sam. Sometimes it's not something I can say. Sometimes it's just noticing something in public, like to answer questions of the model earlier, noticing something in public. If I know, hopefully I'm putting off a vibe as a guy that I'm safe. And if not, maybe my kids are with me or whatever, there's a dynamic there where I'm not coming across as somebody who's wanting to cause harm, but wanting to maybe be a buffer, noticing something, sticking around if I notice something that seems weird, right? Making a phone call if I notice something that's weird, walking in a certain direction because I notice something that seems a little bit off, so that I can be a presence in an area, right? Sometimes it's not about saying something, sometimes it's about the action we take. And I've done the same. Thank you for mentioning that, Sam. I've apologized to women to understand, hopefully, that the presence of us here means that not all guys are like that. A lot of us are trying really hard to change that.
Agreed. And I think it's just being aware of your surroundings, of the women around you, everything else. You know, if you're walking down the street alone at night and there's a woman coming towards you on the sidewalk, it's great if you cross the street and go to the other side before she even gets close to you. If a woman is, walking in front of you alone at night, then you just happen to be going in the same direction. It's also great if you cross the street, go to the other side, or give it 100 feet, 200 feet where you're obviously so far behind that she can't have that feeling of somebody walking right behind her. There's little things we can do, on a daily basis just for ourselves that help people feel more safe, that you don't have to. It doesn't take much energy.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Makes me
beautiful,
wish.
Sam. I really like that you would even consider doing that just right to make that woman who's in your vicinity feel safe. That is an amazing sense of awareness and how attunement to understanding how she may be feeling at the time. She may not be, but you're just making that assumption that I want to make her feel safe around me. I guess what I'm also wondering is that for men, do any of you take on that role of feeling some of that, knowing that that's the major perpetrators are male gender? I'm wondering if any of you carry some of that. Like, I'm not hearing that you are, so I'm just curious if those thoughts ever feel where there's a shame for being male.
Before anyone answers, I just want to say something. We lost Michael because his computer froze. So I think he isn't back yet. So that just that
I
everybody
see him
knows.
back.
And yeah, now please answer the question. I'm sorry, I just wanted to acknowledge.
Am I back yet?
Yeah, you're back. Why don't you go ahead and
Okay.
respond to that if you
You're
don't mind?
back, great.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I had to switch to my phone. I guess computers be a little wonky, but I really appreciate the question that Linda posed and the answers that we're seeing from Will and from Sam on this. I think you make an excellent point, Linda, and that men certainly have a lot to look at in terms of violence and abuse and where that lies. I think I always tackle this question or this conversation around the idea that I think we can all agree that violence is the wrong answer in any kind of situation, and it's the wrong answer in any kind of relationship situation, and that no one should ever be made to be a victim. And I say that a little cautiously, because as a man who has been subjected to abuse by a woman and lived to tell the tale and of thriving and moving beyond that, I've reached on out and come into contact with many circles of men who have also been subjected to the same kind of abuse. And I always have a little bit of a challenging time when we talk about the statistics. I remember at a time when women and women's advocates were making a very strong case, probably 40, 50 years ago. I remember these conversations around domestic abuse and domestic violence. And at the time, lawmakers and the justice system would refer to, or I call the system the courts, would refer to crime statistics at the time that didn't really seem to support that there were as many incidences of female victimization as were being as they looked at the statistics. And female advocates were saying, but you're not catching all the people who are affected, all the women are affected, because there are great levels of shame, maybe self-guilt, secrecy, privacy. Right. And the
as guys, we're just not going to reach out or say anything. Yeah, we're
right.
just not, how many? We're not even reporting. Yeah.
Well, that's the point. The point is that so many women at the time were saying the statistics are not the statistics. You need to dig deeper. You need to talk with victims and really find out what they are. I would submit to you that all of those statistics that they were able to drum on up since that time were very fair and accurate. You know, I would be willing to accept that. What I would also submit is that when we look at the statistics today, men suffer now from some of the same difficulty drumming up statistics, the actual statistics of men. And for all of those very same reasons that women were reluctant to report early on. And it took decades of a culture that embraced and encouraged women to come forward and start telling their true stories. Men, unfortunately, we find ourselves lagging behind in those statistics. And I think I'm always very cautious when we start talking about the statistics, because I remember a day when women had a very hard time proving to the police and the courts that those numbers are not the accurate numbers. They're more there if you look. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. And yeah, and there's so many different layers and levels to it that oh my gosh. That the subtle and the psychological forms of abuse that men might come under from a spouse or a partner that often just are considered are brushed completely under a rug, right? Which is not true. Guys won't even seek help because they think I should be able to figure this out. I'm a guy. I for whatever reason, as guys, the stigma around asking for help or talking to someone about abuse in a partnership, in a marriage, whatever it is, to whatever extent, you know, there's levels and layers to that we can't ignore. that guys just don't have. I didn't, and I still, I would say to this day, I would still love to find somebody to work through some of that stuff that I experienced in my lifetime, but I've not found. It's hard to find practitioners, coaches, or whatever as a guy that can really speak to that for me, to help me through that. It's not the norm.
I appreciate that insight, and I hadn't really thought about that. How as a society, maybe this is happening more often than what we realize for men. Like, we know it obviously is, but maybe it's way worse than what we have been led to believe, is because the men's silence has lasted a lot longer than the women's silence.
Yeah, you just have to
And-
remember that when men start to
Yeah.
report that, they're probably met with some of the same roadblocks that women were met with, decades ago, that don't really exist today as much. I'm not going to say that they're gone for women. They're not. They're absolutely not. But for men, there's a stigmatization by any man who would claim to be, I was beaten up by a woman, or I was, victimized by a woman. There's going to be doubt from the police. There's going to be doubt from the courts. There's going to be doubt from your peers and your family and society in general. And so it's really difficult for men to come forward. And even certain types of abuse that men are just encouraged to sort of brush off. That's not, come on, did you really feel threatened by that? Or, it's always minimized because it's under the guise of that masculine sort of, we're supposed to be Superman and take on anything and shouldn't be threatened by anything and shouldn't be scared by anything. And so so sometimes men suffer in silence and say nothing for fear of being mocked in society and by the system. I'm not trying to equivalize the issue. I'm just stating that I think there's the work that's been done with women in this area and driving those statistics on up to a level of clarity. The same effort needs to be done for men.
And I want to validate and thank you, Michael, for embodying the very reason for this strength and vulnerability. You're sharing something that, 20, 30 years ago, or when you were going through that you might not have wanted to speak in public, and here you're sharing on a forum that is live on the internet. Thank you for that. Thank you for your vulnerability. And
Thanks
I know
for the
that you have
question.
strength. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you all. I appreciate that. That's great.
thank you so much. I cannot believe that our hour is over.
Crazy.
So I'm sorry for everyone who couldn't ask their questions. But I think it was a really great, inspiring, and important conversation. And I have to say, I really liked where it went in the end, because I worked with boys who got sexually abused by family members, often women. And it's a definitely overlooked topic. So thank you, Michael, for bringing this up. I think it's not belittling one experience by bringing up the topic that men have the same experience, because we are human, and human do horrible things to other human, no matter which gender we are. So thank you. And thank you everybody else for showing up so vulnerable and honest and creating the safe space. And thank you for every question and everything you shared. And if each of you want to give a closing line or say something at the end, feel free to do that. I would appreciate it.
Thanks so much for the
Dan?
time that everyone is given. Thank you so much for the paying attention, for asking the questions, and for just engaging in the conversation. There's so much work that's been done, which is so inspiring, but there's still so much more work to do. And this is the forum where that's going to happen. Forums like these. Thank you.
I just want to thank you, Esther, for putting this together, and Will and Michael. It's been great. I just appreciate everybody that came. And if anybody else wants to talk, outside of not coaching, but just have a conversation or whatever, I have a website, email, Instagram, The Art of Wounded Healing. I'm not trying to promote anything. I'm just saying, if that's how you want to get a hold of me, that's where you can find me. So
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes. And Michael, yours, Lions Pride Coaching, correct?
RAR.
Yep. Yep. I'm RAR. Find me on all social media at Will Wismiller. We show up, all of us show up in different places all over the time. I'm on Clubhouse. Sometimes I host rooms in my Compassion Club. I would love to continue this. I was speaking to Esther and everyone ahead of time that I would like to see this happen more often. Part of my trauma recovery journey as part of how I survive on a regular basis as a trauma survivor is I don't show up much on the internet in these spaces, even though I know it's important to get the word out, to have conversations like this, to help other people find platforms where they can speak, to find places where they can begin their own trauma recovery journeys. And I still shrink down from doing that often. So I really hope that we can continue this in whatever capacity